And I think it's fair to say there's also misinformation and disinformation, but if you do a lot of research, I think you'll find that certain things you can be fairly sure of. Now, I'm wondering whether those two things go together or whether they're separate things. And in both cases, does it require a breakdown? Does society have to break down to evolve, and does the individual have to break down to evolve? What do you think?
The point to start with is that what I propose is a new form of spiritual activism. There is no division. Those spiritual types who think at the moment it's appropriate to lock yourself away in the temple and meditate over your navel are not serving God. The odd one or two might be. It might be their particular individual mission, I don't know. But on the whole, you're not going to be serving God. God says to you, there is this transparent and obvious evil out there. Any human being who lives in love has to confront that evil directly. So, to me, we get away from political activism. Political activism was about corporatism. It's about political parties. And as we've seen in all things, corporatism leads to evil, basically. Unless you're a psychopath, any individual human being will be pricked by his own conscience. Whereas when you've got a group of people, like, for example, in the Zionists, the New World Order, if anyone has a prick of conscience, a whole lot of them, they drag them back in and tell them they're being stupid. That's how the group works. Democracy can be translated as mob rule, basically. And that's what we have at the moment. What we should have instead is a fundamental understanding of rights. And of course, the Bible isn't this. People tell you the Bible doesn't say things like this. The Sermon on the Mount, very clear. Those who stand up for truth and justice will find their place in the new world. Because unless you've found truth, you can't do justice, basically.
And personally, do you have to break down before you can awaken again?
You do essentially have to break down.
Seems like it, doesn't it?
Yeah. There's no. I mean, there may be someone somewhere who's managed to go through this whole process, started off living in love, and it's in fact, the odd temptations managed to stay on that path and done it in a very placid manner.
Yeah.
That is not the norm, though. It's a turbulent thing. And of course, that's the point. That the great work to read is The Prophet by Khalil Gibran.
Ah, yes, I know.
And that's very short, sublime spiritual work. But it talks about that and how God, grinds you up like the wheat and so you ground it to wheat and chaff, finely pounded, so you can get rid of all the rubbish, basically. And that is the metaphor. My own journey was one of suffering. I went from being, I would call an extreme atheist, and it was only through a way of suffering, through the injustice, through trying to kill me, through going to prison, having my character dashed in the mainstream media, and of course at the same time seeing everything that I believed in terms of man-made systems being shown to be a fraud before my very eyes, that I then went on a spiritual journey. And I'd like to thank Tony Blair for that, really would. I mean, Tony Blair is, no doubt about it, he is the Antichrist. There's no doubt about it. And I'm absolutely serious about this, and so much I claim to be the Christ figure, he is the Antichrist figure. Let's be clear again, we're not talking about the kind of comic book good and evil, we're talking about a man with a soul, but nevertheless incarnated from a soul with dark potential. In the past, a man who was incarnated as Joseph Stalin, as Torquemada, as the Witchfinder General, as people, as Benjamin Disraeli, that's probably one of his better ones. But yeah, so this man's got form, basically. Augustus Caesar's another one as well.
Oh, okay. All right. I think one of the things about breakdowns actually is that if you take the popular phrase nervous breakdown, it's considered purely a bad thing, I think, and I think mainstream society tends to want to shield us from anything negative. Now I think we'd agree, and I think a lot of people in the alternative movement, that of course all these breakdowns, negative things, can become huge positives, and for some reason you've got to walk through the fire. David Icke calls the midlife crisis a midlife opportunity.
I was just about to say that every business student is told on business courses that the Chinese have the same word for crisis and opportunity.
Oh, right,
I've no idea whether that's true or not, but I've heard that from so many business people.
We'll look that one up.
But that's a good one, and it's another good example. I mean, in the past, I used to think it would be better to be a pessimist than to be an optimist. Because if you're a pessimist, therefore you should be constantly amazed at how good life is. But if you go there as an optimist, you'd be disappointed by life. But actually the reverse is opposite, because it's how we perceive the data. And the old joke about, the glass, is it half empty or is it half full? That's the point. So if you're an optimist, you'll see the good in anything that comes to you. You'll see it as a test from God. You won't think, woe is me, this is a disaster or whatever. I mean, you might be wondering why God has chosen to visit this on you, if you've done something wrong or whatever. But what you're thinking is how can I, do I still live in love in this circumstance, and can I still make the next decision, the right decision? Or will I be provoked along the road to barbarity and violence or whatever? Which involve, I'd look at that when I was trying to change things in the world, because I saw that the political systems didn't work. We had people, some very sinister people in some very influential positions doing some very dark things, basically, and that was why I kind of blew the whistle on that stuff. So yeah.
Can you think of any core beliefs that were suddenly shattered? Was it just stuff about...
my belief in man's ability to create justice.
Okay, all right.
That was my core belief, yes. And also the fact that I kind of believe generally that the majority of people were good, and that they were hamstrung by the rulers who made them fight with each other and exploited them and so on. I've now revised that opinion and say that there's a tiny minority are good. The majority are, I mean, again, they're not malign as such, they're just ignorant. But nevertheless, that's still a problem, because an ignorant man can be manipulated. So I still think it's a minority. But then again, my game is not about quantity. The change in the world will not come about as a mass movement. They can be derailed.
Yeah.
5 people resonating in love, which is 100 times 100 times 100 times 100 times 100, is 10 billion. That could change the 6 billion souls on the planet easily. So it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Yeah, I think people in the alternative movement, we know that there's lots of podcasts, there's lots of videos, there's lots of alternative information. I think some of us maybe think that it's possible there might be a point where everybody gets it. You know, I mean, I think 6 billion is probably a bit optimistic, but if we take England, for example, I think there's a vast amount of people who are intelligent, but they just are not aware. I mean, if you're not aware of something, you may as well not exist, you know? I could make the greatest record in the world, but if I don't market it and no one knows about it, it doesn't exist. That's the problem, you see. I was talking with a family member, and without trying to be too patronising, we were saying that there's about 80% of the public that we're probably never going to reach. So we should maybe target whatever it is, 10 to 20%, who, as I said, are just not really aware. And what do you think could change that? I mean,
you've got
to stop preaching. We can't preach.
Yeah, don't preach to people.
No.
I mean, that's one of the things I learned in 9/11. No matter how good your argument is, if the man or woman you're trying to convince is not ready for that argument, you'll get nowhere.
Yeah.
So very good spiritual teaching is you cannot teach a man who doesn't want to learn. So what we're looking at essentially in society is the top 13 to 15%. So 30 to 50% of people think for themselves.
Yes.
And what reminds me of that, they check facts, they go out and find out other information, do independent research.
Yeah.
At the bottom, there's about 20 to 40% who really just agree with the last person they spoke to.
Yeah.
Now, in the middle of that, there's about 40 to 60% who, given a set of information, will essentially get at the truth from that information. But what they won't do is go outside it and think, well, I've been given this set of facts. Once you do give that 60% in the middle, what you might call the right information, they'll come to the right conclusion. You show them, for example, in 9/11, the research done into, say, nanothermite, which is a product clearly beyond the production skills of Al-Qaeda. You must therefore rationally conclude this comes from a government or an intelligence service or an extremely big organisation. Therefore, it is an inside job and not carried out. And so, that is a smoking gun. Similarly, with the background levels of tritium that day, that would show that being weaponry was fired. There's no other explanation of why there should be that level of tritium and no radioactive fallout, for example.
Yes.
So once you present those facts to people and they're explained properly, people will see it, of course. The 20 to 40% will never see it. But those 6% in the middle will start to see it. What the other side have done, of course, is done a very, very good fortress act on keeping that out of the mainstream. 9/11 glimpsed into the mainstream occasionally. I managed to get in there at one point on Sky
you did,
News.
yeah. I remember that.
But it's not really got in there. And that Sky News thing, I got totally slagged off by the 9/11 truth movement because I had the temerity to actually say that if people looked at the evidence of the damage to the buildings, it was not consistent with the plane going in.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, if anyone hasn't seen that, if you put in David Shayler Sky News on YouTube, you'll find it. And David was actually there to talk about Litvinenko, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he managed to cunningly change the conversation to 9/11, and the BBC, the Sky guy, actually went with it, didn't he? He didn't try and get it straight back to Litvinenko, and they actually had quite an interesting discussion. Why did you get pilloried for that then?
Because at the time there was a great controversy about no planes in 9/11 truth.
Yes.
And they tried to ban me from speaking out about no planes. Like an idiot, I kind of said to them, well, I won't really mention this in public, but if I'm asked about it, I don't quite know what I'm going to do, kind of thing. And there was enormous controversy when I had an interview with a New Statesman journalist when I did that. I knew he was going to do it to me. But I also knew that you get the real evidence in that way. They can't avoid it in the article. It creates more interest. In fact, sometimes in this game you've got to do the injured lapwing thing.
Yes.
The injured lapwing will take you away from the net, the fox away from the nest by pretending he's injured, then flying off, basically. And that was a bit of that, really. It was like, oh, look, I've been injured with this no planes thing. I'm in trouble, kind of thing. But no, I just went in there and turned it around in the Sky interview.
Yeah.
And I said for anybody, watch that interview. That was half an hour, prime time Sky News, when the newspaper journalists are watching, because it's coming close to their deadlines, basically. The influence of that was enormous, and the people in the 9/11 truth movement blew it because of corporate consciousness, because of munchkinism, small-mindedness and everything else. Have they got the mainstream since then? No.